This video is very short, and it's just dealing with critiques of virtue ethics. I wanted you to see that even in the Japanese form of archery that's come down to us from the samurai, that is called Kyudo, that the practitioners of this form of archery are also habituated into a certain form. Notice the asymmetrical bow being held by each of these individuals. Notice that it's higher than it was with the other form, and it's a little bit away from the face. And notice the finger, the left forefinger, or the forefinger on the left hand, how it's pointing forward. So it's just a customary thing in archery that you get habituated into how to shoot. That there's a way to do it right. This is a Kyudo target, and they're always black and white, and they're on a little barrel, a ring that has been made, replaced on that. And pretty much it's still functionally the same thing as one of our bullseyes. It may not have red and blue and white and yellow and those colors on it, but it still has a bullseye. So good, right, not. So, around the world, the nature of archery is very much the same, and it remains a good analogy to trying to do ethics. So virtue ethics, here's its critiques. First of all, it doesn't produce a moral code, which is hard when you're teaching children. For instance, do your duty, or do what causes the greatest good for the greatest number of people. I mentioned to you that there are complaints about those things, but they are at least codes, although they lack details. Virtue theory doesn't give you an imperative like this at all. So that does seem to be a difficult thing, that there's no moral code. Similarly, it lacks the strength or the forcefulness of having duties, even duties to the greatest number of people with utilitarianism. It only provides you with a basis on which to select what you consider to be your obligation in a given situation, which is subject to the accusation of that being very, very person-relative. Next, it has questionable action-guiding ability, since it is agent-centered rather than action-centered. Remember that flow chart that I gave you, and on the left is utilitarianism and deontology, and both of those are addressing what should I do. But on the right, when we're dealing with ethics of character, it's not addressing what should I do, it's addressing what does it look like for me to be a man or a woman of character, of virtue. Next is the accusation that it's open to the charge of being, potentially anyway, relative to your culture, since different cultures emphasize different virtues. I guess I'd give a little pushback on that and say that as far as the virtues from culture to culture, for the most part, those are very similar. There are some odd cultures that have been discovered by cultural anthropologists where things that just seem impossible to approve of are approved of within certain limits or constraints, such as there is a culture in New Guinea, nearby to Irian Jaya, in which it was considered a good thing within the tribe if you were to fool or betray somebody who thought they were your friend. However, it wasn't good if it was with your family or if it was somebody within the tribe. So this is that it's potentially very relative to your culture, but it does need to be said overall, the things that are praised in cultures are more similar than dissimilar. Next, because of its focus on virtue and character, it's not particularly helpful in the business of governing and legislating. I think this is its biggest failure. This is a place where virtue ethics really is not that helpful. When we're dealing with military, we're dealing with medical, we're dealing with a nation, those kinds of decisions, virtue ethics really doesn't work. It's not that helpful. It's more having to do with the individual and less having to do with governance of society. So when it comes to things done at a societal level, there is clearly a need for a moral code or a formula of some sort that can be enforced. But how do you prosecute somebody for failing to be a person of character? It's just too general. Lastly, it seems to make decision-making very internal and introspective, and it requires the moral agent to look within to his or her own view of what makes that individual a person of virtue. And then it leaves them to work out for themselves the implications of their conclusions in their own particular situation. So thus, like deontology, it lacks content. That's all that I've got there for you. Those are the primary critiques that I can find of virtue ethics.